The original readers of the four Gospels, the books of the Bible that focus on the life of Jesus, would have thought its contents scandalous. Here was a Jew claiming to be holy, who at the same time fraternized with people who were unacceptable to and condemned by the religious leaders of his day. For instance, Jesus went out of his way to meet with a Samaritan woman, an action which was outlawed by his society. Samaritans were a hated group of mixed-race Hebrews, despised by every upright, pure-blooded Jew. And even though we retell Jesus' famous story of the Good Samaritan, the depth and the significance of the stigma associated with being a Samaritan from a Jewish point of view is largely lost to us. Jesus originally told his story in response to the question, "Who is my neighbour?" which was posed to him by one of the nation's religious experts. That's because Jesus, as we know, was famous for reducing the core of the Hebrew Bible's teaching to love God and love your neighbour as you love yourself. But here's the thing. Elsewhere and earlier, Jesus, in his famous Sermon on the Mount, had taught his followers to love their enemies. So, was the principle of loving your neighbour some slightly more realistic and reduced version of his more ambitious original challenge to love your enemies? As we learn from the story Jesus told in response to the question, it was simply that Jesus' definition of neighbour is so wide that it embraces all of our enemies. A bit of background is needed here. Jews hated Samaritans. They really hated Samaritans, all Samaritans. On any orthodox reading of their scriptures, it was very clear to them that people of Samaria were persona non grata. In the Israel of Jesus' day, the S word was a term of contempt and abuse. Both the Jewish and the Samaritan religious leaders taught their people that it was absolutely off limits to have any contact at all with the opposite group. This tension, which sometimes even boiled over into outright hostility between geographical next-door neighbours, went back centuries. Samaria had once been part of the old United Kingdom of Israel under King David and Solomon his son. But that was before the 10 northern tribes of the country proclaimed self-rule, separating from what they perceived to be the rich south and their corrupt royal family. All this had taken place 3/4 of a millennium ago. Since then, the northern kingdom had been destroyed by the superpower of Assyria, and the majority of its people dispersed or taken into captivity, never to return again. But the Samaritans had survived, and now proudly regarded themselves as the true descendants of those old northern tribes, the guardians of authentic faith in the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Moses. The leaders of the Jews, however, the 2 southern tribes, saw things very differently. As far as they were concerned, the Samaritans were an apostate group of heretics who practiced an immoral, corrupt and corrupting faith, and who had been rejected by their God. It was into this context that Jesus introduced a very Jewish audience to his story of an abandoned and vulnerable Jew, ignored by 2 proud members of the Jewish establishment or hierarchy, but eventually helped out by a despised Samaritan traveller. And it didn't make easy listening. Today you can't help but think that Jesus might have told a similar story in terms of Jews and Palestinians, or Protestants and Catholics, or Sunnis and Shias, or NATO and Russia, or Christians and Muslims, or evangelicals and gay men and women. The point, however, remains exactly the same. The person who acted with generosity, grace and mercy towards someone on the other side of the fence was the one who was a true neighbour. The sting of the tale is, of course, this. Just as the religious and political leaders of Jesus' day dismissed his views, teaching and behaviour as naive, morally scandalous and even downright heretical, Still today, little has changed. The Quakers have a beautiful saying: "An enemy is a friend whose story we have not yet heard." We're always imprisoned by our exclusion of people who are different from us. We're never released by it. Besides anything else, we need them for our own wholeness. For it's only as we build bridges with those who don't see life our way that we begin to confront and deal with the hidden and ugly parts of our own understanding, our own souls, our prejudices and our judgmentalism. Without them, we're diminished. But through our inclusion and acceptance of them, our story becomes richer and deeper than it would have otherwise been. We're stretched, we're renewed, we're transformed. In a world where we can be friends with whoever we like, why would we choose only to befriend those who are strikingly similar to us in opinion, outlook, ethnicity, and income? In a world where we can believe in any God we like, why would we choose to believe in a protectionist, tribal, exclusive God who's made in our image and confined to the limits of our prejudice, our imagination? A deity who in the end is little more than a projection of our own fears. I'm not pretending that Jesus or any of the New Testament writers understood, let alone mention the specifics of modern day issues surrounding inclusion in our society. But I am saying that you can bet your bottom dollar that Jesus' attitude to all these groups, excluded or reduced by us, either intentionally or thoughtlessly, because of their disability, their race, their social status, their sexuality, their gender, or any other factor, would have been exactly as it was to all those that the religious leaders of his day marginalised and dismissed, but whom he counted as his friends. The way I see it, devoting our lives to following Jesus is a decision to give ourselves to fighting for justice, equality, and inclusion. Put another way, Jesus taught grace. So to use his teachings to exclude anyone is quite literally a disgrace. What do you think? What prejudices did your church once hold that you've now left behind? What prejudices did you once hold that you've now left behind? What, if any, prejudices do you or your church still cling to that exclude others? Let's talk again next week.